My name is Carrie Damon. I'm one of the organizers for the Best Practices series here at MaRS. I'd like to welcome you to our monthly Best Practice series. Today we have Debbie Baxter, who is one of the MaRS advisors speaking on effective sales and business development. Before I introduce Debbie a little bit more, I would like to thank our sponsors. These sessions are brought to you by CIBC with additional support from the William and Nona Heaslip Foundation. So we are very grateful that they are supporting these educational programs. Materials for the best practice sessions will be found about a week later there's a blog that will link to the video if you want to see some parts again or share it with others. And there will be a survey emailed to you. It's a really quick survey today after the session, and we appreciate your comments for future ideas for best practice sessions. So we're having them about once a month, and we are always looking for great topics that you're interested in hearing about. So we are very lucky to have Debbie Baxter here today. She has a lot of experience in sales and business development. Most recently, she's right now the Chief Sustainability Officer at Loyalty One. So she develops and manages a lot of key initiatives for corporate sustainability there. So Loyalty One is a global leader in loyalty marketing, but it's also trying to be a leader in sort of greening initiatives as well. In her past experience, she led a consulting team at Oracle, and she was also president at an emerging technology firm in the trade show market. And sort of more recently, before she started work at Loyalty One, she was the chief operating officer with Green Rewards, which is an innovative, eco-conscious loyalty business that's now part of the Air Miles program. So it is my pleasure to welcome Debbie.
So my biggest challenge today is working the Apple laptop that I'm not used to, so everybody fingers crossed that I don't screw this up. So I have the enviable task of talking about a very large topic area in a very short period of time, sales and business development. We're going to talk a little bit about marketing because it kind of builds into the flow of things, branding, a lot of different topics today. So hopefully it'll be useful for you. So as Carrie mentioned, I spent about 10 years in consulting. And I think the interesting thing about consulting is that you're really selling every day. You have to earn the right to come back the next day. And the only way that you can really do that with clients is if you're kind of delivering value every time they see you. So it certainly gets you into this kind of selling yourself and selling your products kind of mindset. Most recently, here as an advisor with MaRS, I think I'm in my second year now of doing that, and I see a lot of different companies, and there's some themes that kind of emerge as we're talking to early stage companies and offering them advice. So we'll build some of those themes into our program today. So we're going to do three things. We're going to talk a little bit at the beginning about sales skills, because I think this is one of the themes that kind of comes up frequently with emerging companies. We're going to look at the whole sales spectrum, so all the different pieces of the process that need to be there. So we're going to touch on all of them to a greater degree. And then we've included some real take-home tools for you guys to continue the learning process, because I can't possibly teach you to be salespeople in an hour. There's much more required. So we'll give you some tools that you can go to kind of think about further development afterwards. So just show of hands, who's with an emerging company, who's like an entrepreneur, a leader in their smaller company. Other salespeople kind of wanting to get into sales or sales in larger companies kind of thing. Okay, awesome, good to know. I'll try and tailor my comments accordingly. So let's just talk a little bit about skill sets of the entrepreneur. So as you have a great idea, you're an inventor, you've kind of come up with this concept for a business, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you've had experiences in your life that give you selling skills. And they really are a distinct set of skills. So if we look at this chart, the right-hand side, the blue side, is really the thing that most people have. And certainly as I meet with early stage companies, there are lots of people that are the experts in their particular field. So the deep knowledge on the particular industry that they're in and their ability to talk with great credibility about that. And that's certainly an element of the process. So, it's really tough to sell if you don't have that. That credibility is very important to prospects and customers. But at the same time, it's not the whole pie. The sales skills on the left-hand side of the chart are important. So when we think about the ability to build a solution and the ability to knit those technical details and the relevant lingo with the solution creation for the customer. Because if there's one message that I would like you to kind of walk away with today, it's that it's really, none of this is about you and your company and your product. It's really about your customer. So if you can kind of make that mind shift through the next hour, then I think that will be a valuable takeaway for everyone today. So if we're making things about the customer, then we need to be thinking about that solution for them, knitting our offering into their business outcomes. So I'll give you an example. When I was at Oracle, we did a lot of work with Hudson's Bay, and it was important to be able to speak the retail language. And I personally have found that retailers are, there's kind of a bit of a club, a bit of a clique. You have to kind of speak the language, or they don't really want to talk to you, especially as a vendor. If you can't kind of put things in terms of sales per square feet and increasing basket size and all of these kind of metrics that are very important to their business and are the metrics that they manage their success on, then they really don't want to speak to you. So, or they'll give you a very short amount of time. So that's really the combination of that industry knowledge. So doing that research into what those important things are, those metrics in your customer's world, and at the same time being able to marry that up to a solution. And last but certainly not least, people like to do business with people that they like. So, you have to be well-rounded from that standpoint too, and be able to kind of have a conversation, talk to them about things other than the solution. So to, kind of have that ability to chat and definitely kind of build that relationship. So that kind of, talks to the difference between a hunter and a farmer. So I don't know how many people have kind of heard that distinction before. Basically, if you're like in a high growth kind of industry, which is what most emerging companies are looking for, then you want your sales team or your salespeople to be focused from a hunting standpoint. And hunting really is about, kind of short-term focus on winning deals and making those connections turn into profitable sales for the company. A farmer, it's more about kind of sowing the seeds of relationships and kind of continuing those sales processes over time. So short-term focus, long-term focus. I feel that in a successful sales process, there needs to be elements of both. I don't think that hit-and-run selling generally works in the long term. You can definitely get some short-term kind of benefit, but it doesn't translate into long-term success. So the balance between those two skill sets really comes into this kind of personal talent and the ability to, kind of create that relationship with your customer. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the sales spectrum. And the idea here is that we have, kind of 8 different topics that we're going to dive into. And I'm probably going to talk fast for us to be able to get through all of that in the time that we have. All of these are elements of a successful sales structure and process. There's bits of marketing here that we're going to go into because you can't really separate the two in my mind. But we might as well just kind of dive right into that. A big mix of different methodologies too. So, there's spin selling, there's lots of different kind of methodologies that you can use to approach it. And I'm not really advocating any one. You'll find a mix of several that I've used in this presentation. So the very first thing, and as an advisor who works with a lot of early stage companies, that I would ask you to focus on is clarity. So it is a frequent thing when we meet with entrepreneurs at the beginning that they haven't got kind of a crisp message around Gen 1 product, Gen 2's coming later, what's in this release, what's in the next release, making it very clear to customers what it is that they're buying. So having that kind of clarity in your mind, in your sales collateral, in your team, so that everyone knows. When I was working at ShoCare, we were kind of a $15-20 million company in the trade show space selling technology. And when I first arrived there, we had that issue. So, if customers wanted to know, what they would get with their software, then the salespeople would kind of answer, well, whatever you would like to have, we can, customize it. We can build it to be whatever you want, which in theory sounds like a great answer, but the challenge is that it makes it very difficult to compare you to your competitors. And, the customer wants to understand value for money. And so if that envelope is kind of shrinking and growing with every conversation, then it makes it very difficult for them to make a decision to buy from you. So clarity, I think, is step one, and in defining that scope of of offering and being very clear and crystal on that. Doesn't mean that you can't deviate from a negotiating standpoint later in the process. If there's a really killer function that somebody needs or an enhancement to the product, then you can look at bringing that into scope, but at least you know what you're starting from and you know where your pricing is starting from. So the second thing is brand. So, probably a great kind of follow on from the clarity discussion. So just, to have some audience participation. So what kind of brands speak to you? Like, what are the most kind of memorable brands that you can think of? I would start the discussion with Nike and Apple, probably two really successful brands on the consumer side. Any other suggestions of brands that are really compelling? Didn't know I was going to make you work, did you? Sony is great. Shell, yeah. Yeah. Brutes. ICOM. IBM, that's a great one. Great business to business brand. Those are all great examples. So, I had the good fortune of actually going to Nike and visiting on their campus a couple years ago, and if you have some spare time and you're interested in branding, I would definitely encourage you to look into the history of the Nike brand. It's like absolutely, I find it fascinating, the evolution with Steve Prefontaine and their whole focus on athletes. So, as a consumer, Nike really puts out the message that they're about innovation for athletes. So, you're buying the best kind of technical apparel or shoes or equipment or whatever from them because they put this innovation, they've invested the time and the money for the innovation. And so that's meaningful to us as consumers, but they actually live up to that as a brand. So they, go out and they find these people. They were talking to Tiger when he was 5 years old and didn't have the problems he's having today. And the ability to kind of connect with those athletes and make them part of the process. They come in and they consult with them on gear, and they have a shoe development process that's really quite fascinating. So they have taken their brand and made it about everything that they do, and that's what I would encourage you to do at this step of the process, is to think about, are you an aggressive brand? Are you going to speak to consumers? If it's a business to business brand, IBM's a great example. It was mentioned by the crowd. IBM, started out as a hardware kind of machine manufacturer and has expanded into one of the most successful technology companies on the planet. And they've done that through a very clear vision of how they're evolving their brand year over year into different areas. They've come to mean reliability and conservatism and some of those kind of concepts that have definitely come a long way from the place that they started. So if I can make this work, I'm going to just play a little clip because I think it's kind of cool.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. But the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones.
Uh-oh. Okay. So that's like a YouTube problem. So that's not a Debbie problem. I didn't do anything. Anyway, sorry. So that was the creative that Apple put into the market after Steve Jobs came back to the company. I don't know how many of you recognize that. But basically, I think it's a great example. It's not about computers, it's not about MacBooks, it's not about the product, it's about the brand. And so I would encourage you to really spend some creative time as emerging companies thinking about how do you want to portray your brand to the market. And it's a long-term thing. It's something that you can evolve in stages. Sometimes you need to be aspirational and kind of pick that brand that you want to grow up to be. So that was kind of the message. Yay, got back. Some good references. There's a guy named Adam Morgan who wrote a great book called Eat the Big Fish. It's all about challenger brands. He has another book called, I think, The Challenger Brand, The Pirate Within or The Pirate Inside. And it's all about strategies that you can use to create to be lighthouse brands. So, kind of creating this idea of the identity behind your company. I think in some markets, as emerging companies, you'll be taking on bigger players, and there's a lot of kind of strategies for how to do that in those books. 4 dimensions to a strong brand around identity, so kind of having that personality of the brand. Emotion, so sometimes it's about humor. Sometimes, as you can see in that example, it's more about a stirring kind of emotion. Intensity and relevance or salience. So, those are kind of the elements that you need to drill into as you're creating your brand. Value proposition. So those of you who are my clients in the room will know that we talk about value proposition a lot. And it's really an important thing to, again, get clarity on, and so you can kind of take that out to your customers. Another kind of book reference, there's a guy named Jeffrey Moore who wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm, whatever. And he has a bit of a methodology, so I was actually going to write this down. Okay, so basically, he has this methodology that kind of goes through and says, for what market, for who are you presenting your product offering? So, who is your company in search of? What are your customers? And then more specifically in that market, who are the specific customers that you want to target? So maybe you're going into the, kind of green, clean tech space, and you're going to target solar manufacturers. So, that kind of an understanding. Then the is the specific offering. So for the clean tech space, targeted at the specific solar manufacturers, this is the product that we're taking to them. That, and then you drive the benefits. So the things that it's going to add value to them to have, so the specific reason that they would want to buy your product. Unlike the competition. So unlike today, where perhaps there's not an automated solution, keeping in mind that you often are competing with the do-nothing kind of competition or the status quo, that inertia. So unlike whatever the competitive situation is, and then the last statement is really about your product. So unlike the competition, our product delivers X. So this little formula to kind of help you think through that value proposition needs to be very succinct and clear, and it needs to be something that all of your company kind of buys into. There's an analogy around, you're selling Band-Aids and your customer has a bleeding neck wound. So one of our advisors kind of came up with that analogy, and I just absolutely love it because that's how, real and tangible it needs to be. So, you can kind of visualize the blood kind of gushing out, and you've got the bandage to kind of solve their problem. So that's the connection that you need to create with your product or your offering to your customers. What is that kind of urgent issue that they have that you've got the resolution for? So plan and process. So early in my career, I was an accountant, so this is the part that kind of appeals to me as keeping track of it all. So it's important to develop good sales skills early in the process. So even as an emerging company, and maybe it's a one-man shop, maybe it's just you, maybe there's a team of people that support you. But having the ability to kind of sit down and think about what is the overall business plan. So, how many units are we trying to sell this year? Creating that forecast, having some kind of a target that you're shooting for. Then looking at, okay, if I'm going to sell that many units, then what does my funnel look like? So, your sales funnel is really all of the different opportunities, the leads. We'll talk a little bit about lead generation in a minute. The leads and opportunities that you have to have a conversation. So it's not a prospect. I would make the distinction that a prospect is someone that you've actually engaged with. You know that they have some interest in you. So, your funnel, and it's kind of that visual picture of a funnel in your mind. You really got the whole universe of possibilities that you're starting from, and then you're breaking that down into a smaller list which is the prospects, so people that you're actually going to have a meeting with. Then once you've kind of met with people and you actually have delivered a proposal or talked to them about, your product, had a meeting, depending on the different ways that you're selling, then you can start to kind of track them from a forecast standpoint. And having a sales forecast is another, it's a skill set all its own to be able to do that kind of forecasting. And if you're, needing to report that to investors or to your board, then there's definitely some diligence that they're going to be looking for in that process. So, it's easy when you're in a very early stage and you have maybe 3 prospects that you're talking to, and they're big ones, and that's going to, kind of make or break the sales for the year. But, in year 2 and year 3, when that list starts to get a little bit longer, then one of the strategies is to attach percentages to each opportunity. So, it has a 20% likelihood of closing, or it has a 50% likelihood of closing. And, those are based on, sometimes gut feel about how, the conversation went. And, sometimes it's about tangible responses. So maybe, 20% means that they've completed a customer survey, so they've actually given you some information about their situation and allowed you to factor that into the proposal. Maybe 50% means that you're talking about pricing and you are having a real conversation about value and what the product costs, and they are returning your phone calls and they don't kind of ditch you for 2 weeks before the next conversation. And then maybe 75% means that you've gotten to the next kind of stage. You have product available to ship. You're ready to kind of fulfill the order. You're talking to them about how they're going to fund it and where the budget exists in their organization, and then you get to close. So those, there's no real hard and fast rule about what those percentages are. You can create those for your own team and your own individual use. But that kind of idea of moving them through the process is really what your investors will be looking for from a forecast standpoint. So we're going to talk about how you get leads into your funnel in a second. So the quote I would give you here is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So, certainly from I think it's from The Art of War, although I've heard other people kind of cite it. But I think that a plan is a really important thing to shape around the sales process, because you don't really want to be, kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what fits. You want to kind of create a plan of who you're going to talk to and then go through in a very measured way to talk to those people. Lead generation. So I've done a lot of marketing in my career, so now I'm on the loyalty program marketing side, and I ran a lead generation registration company in the trade show space and a variety of other things. So, I think that lead generation is something that's worth thinking about. You will clearly start with your kind of contact list and your network and your neighbors and your brother-in-law's dogs, walker, and all those kind of connections. But then, that only will kind of take you so far, and then you'll need to kind of get to a place where you're thinking about lead generation. And there are a lot of ways to do that today. So, click-throughs, so there's a lot of stuff that you can do from a web presence standpoint. Trade shows are interesting too, although I would caution you that, 80% of the leads gathered at trade shows are not followed up on. So, if you're attending, then you need to have a very crisp process on what you're going to do with those leads that you gather in the booth. It tends to be a larger investment too, so we're talking, it depends on the event, but if you're going to have a booth with a presence, then it tends to be a $10,000 or $20,000, sometimes way more than that, but at a minimum kind of presence. So, you need to really feel that you're getting quality leads out of that process. And, a quality lead would be something where it's been qualified. So that the person that's on that list has an interest in the industry. They are somehow relevant to your value proposition. So maybe, if you're selling in the clean tech space and you're interested in selling to solar manufacturers, then maybe all the people that are attending this conference are, work for solar manufacturers or something like that. So you have a pretty strong resonance that there's a correlation between what they're looking for and what you're offering. So, check my notes. Cold calling. So, one of the ugly truths of selling is that sometimes you have to pick up the phone and call people you don't know. And I don't think I've ever run into anyone who's really happy doing that or comfortable doing that. But it is part of the process, and some people get really good at it. I think there is a lot of little tricks along the way that you need to certainly be aware of. Very important. So, timing is really important. So don't call them Monday morning, don't call them Friday afternoon. So people, if you kind of think about your own calendars, you're getting organized for the week on Monday morning, and a distraction really isn't going to help. You're not in a creative place where you're interested in a new vendor offer. And Friday afternoon, you're planning your weekend, thinking about your vodka martini or whatever, and you're not really interested at the same time in getting that kind of a call happening. So from a timing standpoint is really important. And I think there's a tone that's important too. So you need to, again, it's all about the customer. You need to kind of put yourself in their shoes and think about the message that you're trying to deliver. So, likely it's about solving a problem for them. So, can I have 5 minutes of your time to fix X? And you may get them to invest that time. If you call saying, I've got this great new development in, bio something, and it doesn't, kind of off the top kind of speak to something that's on their top 10 things to worry about today, then they may not want to take the call. So you've got to find a way to make it relevant to their top 10 if you're going to kind of place that cold call. Talked about trade shows. Direct marketing is also interesting. So, I think it's becoming, direct/email, buying lists is something that is definitely a way to kind of short circuit some of that process. With the privacy laws in Canada are certainly having their impact on the availability of those lists, and we're certainly from a loyalty program standpoint, we're very into all this kind of stuff. If you can find a list that's very relevant to your space, again, it's about that kind of qualification process. So if you can find one that's useful, that's great. If it's a list that kind of worked for your buddy who's running a completely different company and not necessarily relevant to what you're doing, it's probably a waste of your time and your money to pursue those people. So the whole kind of spam concept comes through a lot in direct mail, either paper or email. And then there's the whole green thing too now. So people are getting very resistant to kind of paper products and paper advertising. So you have to figure out where you are on that spectrum of sustainability, and if a paper kind of drop that comes in the mail or goes to someone at their office, whether that's consistent with your brand and your alignment and what you're trying to do. So if you're a big clean tech company, as an example, and you're going to send out, a mass mailing of, paper with envelopes and catalogs and things like that, like it may not really resonate with that brand concept that we were talking about at the beginning. But essentially, from a lead generation standpoint, I would say that it tends to be, different approaches work for different selling, like different products, different markets, different industries. So you have to kind of do a little bit of trial to see what works specifically for you. So we'll talk a little bit about the pitch deck. So this is something else that I work on a lot with my clients about their having the best kind of offering to put in front of their prospects. So, really important to be clear on that value proposition that we talked about earlier. So, you've got your kind of clarity, a product vision, you've got your brand, so you know how you're going to kind of graphically represent the things that you're going to pitch to your customer. You've got the value proposition of why it's relevant to them. And the specifics that you include in the deck need to be, they need to have the right impact. So, I think it's also about style. So, you'll see in my presentation today, lots of pictures, lots of big pictures, allowing you to kind of tailor the words to the specific situation. That's my style of delivering. There are definitely rules around how many words you should have on a page and how many actual bullets people are going to be able to pay attention to. I advocate that your deck is not your script. So if you want a tool to memorize what you're going to say, don't use this. I think that comes across really badly to people. That's my own kind of personal view. I think it's about kind of organizing your thoughts and using the deck as your kind of points of emphasis that you want the customer to remember, not that you want to remember as you're talking. The other thing to point out is that your investor deck and your client or your customer prospect deck are very different. So a lot of details that exist in the investor deck around structure and management team expertise and all those kind of things that in the typical client scenario won't apply. I definitely would tell you that there are exceptions to that, where maybe you're looking at clients that are more like partners because they're very early stage and you need them to, you know, kind of walk the journey with you, then you may need to share some of those details. But once you've gotten past those first few deals, then you really want the internal part of your company to kind of be internal and to be broadcasting a credibility to your customers that exists from a product and a professionalism standpoint. So you'll get to a point where those details do not need to be disclosed. So if we kind of talk about some of the things that exist in there in this deck, right? So you kind of start with your, you know, title and the, you know, kind of purpose of getting together, you know, the kind of summary of why the meeting's happening. And, you know, very quickly you need to move to the problem that you're solving. So in the exact same way that with the cold call, you need to kind of get their attention. You need to kind of grab of the, you know, 7,000 things that are going through their mind about their grocery list and what their kid's doing at baseball practice. You need to kind of grab their attention with what problem you're fixing for them. So that, to me, should be like almost the very first thing that you talk about in this deck. And then the solution. So, you know, again, back to that kind of bleeding neck wound analogy. So, you know, first you kind of talk about the bleeding neck wound, and then you talk about the bandage. So, you know, kind of creating that solution for them. Pricing probably comes next. So kind of talking about pricing, and let's talk about that a little bit for a second. So really clear, concise, easy to understand pricing. So if you find that you have, you know, too many kind of details and if, ands, or buts in that pricing scheme, then again, you're just making it tougher for your customer to say yes. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to kind of go, wow, so yes, I have that bleeding neck wound, yes, I want a bandage, and oh my God, it only costs $1, right? So that whole thought process becomes very simplistic for them. And then, you know, last, the whole kind of description of the secret sauce. So certainly in an emerging market and with emerging companies, you've got, you know, some details that you need to share around the things that you're doing that perhaps they don't understand. So I would leave that to kind of more towards the end. So you've kind of had a business discussion, talked a little bit about, you know, what that's going to cost them, and then talk about some of the technology. I would say, you know, it's been my experience that most people have that reverse. They kind of talk about the secret sauce first and, you know, kind of perhaps get a little bit lost and lose the attention of the customer before they get to the place where they tell them why it's relevant. And that's not as effective. If you reorder that, then it works better. So, you know, sizzle, I think it's important to, you know, have something that looks very professional, but again, it needs to be consistent with your brand. If you have a very conservative kind of brand, then maybe that, you know, presentation style doesn't work. Maybe you don't need that kind of big, sexy pictures. Empathy is really important. So the ability to kind of put yourself in your customer's shoes, thinking about, you know, you know, if they're a really busy person, then you should probably plan for like a 30-minute presentation. Be on time and make sure that you stick to your 30 minutes. And if it looks like you're going to go over, then, you know, ask them if it's reasonable for the conversation to continue. Ask them if they have the time. They may have something else booked immediately afterwards, and all they're thinking about is getting out to their next meeting. So that's not productive for you. There's also a lot of stuff, and there's information on the MaRS website about some of this as well. But, you know, there's a lot of protocol around booking those meetings, following up after the meeting. So following up with an email or a phone call that allows you to just reinforce the messages. So again, that clear value proposition you can reinforce in your email or your voicemail. But also there should be a call to action, right? So it's about perhaps setting up the next meeting or whatever that next step in the process is for you. Perhaps it's a demo of the product. Also important to develop your kind of elevator version, right? So, you know, when I was much younger and working at Oracle, and I had a conversation with the president of Oracle, and he said, you know, if you had the CEO of whatever big deal you're trying to do. We were talking to Nortel then. Nortel was a good prospect at that point. They're perhaps not as good of a prospect now, but at that point they had lots of money. And the president of Oracle said, you know, if you have the president of Nortel in the elevator with you, you know, what's the 2-minute version of what you're selling that you're going to deliver to him? And what I've found through my career is that there are a lot of opportunities that are created like that, where you have a very small time window to make an impression on someone who could be very useful in your process. So plan for that. So plan for having that kind of 2-minute pitch that allows you to get that value proposition out. So I would suggest it's, you know, very much structured around this. So, you know, for people like you that are in this industry, here's the offering that we have, and here's why it's great for you. So, So that's the kind of offline, without the deck elevator pitch is an important element to create. And the last point that I would make is that tailor your presentation to each customer. So again, kind of going back to that theme that it's not about you, it's about them. Then each presentation should largely be different. Maybe you're selling to 10 different hospitals, and so each of those 10 hospitals has the same kind of pain that you're trying to resolve. So then the majority of the deck is the same, but change it to have their logo included, or do something to kind of personalize it and make it seem like that deck was created just for them. So it's kind of making them feel like you came to that meeting for them very specifically. Deal structure. So deal structure, and you may have noticed by now, like all of these topics we could do like an hour on in its entirety. So I'm trying to just kind of touch on the hot points, and I'm sure Carrie will arrange more sessions in the future to kind of delve into these topics in more detail. But the point that I would make about deal structure is that there's a lot of different ways to kind of peel the onion, and it's important to be creative. One of the opportunities that as advisors we were meeting with in the clean tech space a while ago, and we realized very quickly that in talking about the business, that some of the suppliers of some of the components that they were using to create their business model, their product, the suppliers were likely to be prospects as well. So, because the product worked in large commercial enterprises, it was something that they could actually use their suppliers as a bit of a pipeline to kind of sell back into their factories. So, be creative about, kind of where you're kind of finding those prospects. And because of that, you need to be creative about your deal structure. So it could be that, in some scenarios you're looking at a partnership, so there's like more of a royalty kind of a fee that's being paid to you for your product. Especially in the technology space, lots of great examples where you've developed something interesting and one of the big players needs to come and incorporate that into their much larger product offering. So instead of competing with Facebook, you're getting a royalty from Facebook on a per-click basis, which is a really good deal. So it's that kind of thing, to be creative and to think about how to do that. So licensing, partners, simplicity is important. I think that sometimes deals get lost because people try to complicate them. So, it's like, I need a per transaction fee, and then I want, X amount as a marketing fee every year, and I want, another add-on and another add-on. Build your pricing scheme so that it's simplistic, and all of those add-ons are just dealt with in the core pricing, especially in the initial stages of your business. It's important for that clarity and simplicity to be there. It's also important to not kind of give away the farm, though. So I would encourage you to think about, if you're kind of going into a 5-year agreement with someone, not only will the world be very different in 5 years, but your company will as well. So, committing to pricing for 5 years is a really long horizon. So you probably want to, in this deal structure, perhaps have an annual revisit of the pricing structure, or an opportunity to kind of look at that at different points in time, or make it a 1-year deal. Now, it's tough to walk away. Like if somebody wants your product for 5 years, like you kind of want to say yes to that. So you need to, be careful of balancing. Investors will think it's great that you have recurring revenue on a 5-year horizon. That's awesome. But at the same time, if you aren't confident about your cost structure, and that could end up being an unprofitable deal 2 or 3 years from now as your company scales, then you need to be thinking about those considerations up front. So simplicity is important, but you have to kind of do your homework. And lots of great examples of different ways to kind of drive revenue, or that pricing scheme for the deal. So click-throughs. Sometimes you actually become a lead generation engine. So if it's an online business, sometimes there's an opportunity for a lead generation revenue or referrals. The other thing to think about is geography. So, especially if you're licensing, then is this like a global agreement, or are you looking at it from a North American standpoint, perhaps only Canada? And then what will the rationale be for taking things into another geography? And is there an opportunity to open up that contract and revisit it at some point in the future? Piloting is a really good strategy. So, kind of piloting in Canada, piloting in a smaller version, Ontario perhaps, and then looking at doing a longer term deal on a more global basis when you've had a bit of experience with working with the customer. So to kind of give you an example, when we were working with Hudson's Bay, when I was working at Oracle, and we did a big ticket system for them. So retailers have their typical kind of point of sale system, but if you're dealing with mattresses or appliances or patio furniture, then they need a big ticket system for delivery scheduling, and sometimes when you have a mattress delivered, you want the old one taken away. So there's all this like complication related to the delivery process. And so kind of going back to that message, we wanted to kind of remove the pain from the delivery process and allow them to commit to very specific timelines. So as a consumer, you want it delivered on Tuesday between 10 and 2, because that's when you're going to be home, and you want that window to be as small as possible, and you want them to hit it for sure 100% of the time. So we created a system that did that for them. And from a pricing standpoint, we had to look at the cost and the pain that we were alleviating. So there was a very traditional kind of license model that worked for the software and consulting services. You're kind of paying on a day-by-day basis. But to understand whether the value proposition was working for the customer, we really had to look at the cost of the pain we were alleviating on an annual basis, and then what would the payback on this project be. So if they were going to spend $2 million to implement this big ticket system, would that be a 10-year payback for them or 6 months? So it ended up, they were very happy with it, and it was a very good payback for them, less than 2 years, which for a technology project of a certain scale is a good metric. And it ended up alleviating a lot of those problems. But it was a very, kind of in-depth analysis of the situation that we had to do to drive the pricing and therefore the deal structure. Okay, so we get through all of that. So we've had our clarity, we created our brand, we've got this cool Sizzly brand that we're really excited about that's going to be a lighthouse in our market, and we put our plan together, and we've generated the leads, and we've looked at the pricing structure, and we've gotten to a place where we've done the deal. So we're at the point where we're going to put pen to paper, and we're going to actually close this deal. And I think the caution that I would give you at this point is that it's very much about creating lifetime customers. So this is really where the customer service element of things kind of kicks in. And you don't ever want to be signing a deal that is either, that's not a win-win. That's not a win for you, and it's not a win for the customer. And my experience is that I've certainly been in those situations where I felt uncomfortable about the deal that was getting signed. I didn't think it was, sometimes customers don't know what is best for them, right? Like they're choosing perhaps the less expensive option when the more robust option would really fix the problem to a greater degree, things like that. So it's important to develop the skill to be able to kind of have those conversations. And it's a very tricky thing. You want to be kind of open about any follow-on actions, any further refinements that need to happen after the deal is done. I think that it's about integrity and about no surprises. So if there's if your customer is going to be upset or concerned about something today, after they put pen to paper and committed $2 million of their budget that their boss is going to give them shit for, I guess I'm not supposed to say that, but is going to give them a real hassle about, then they're going to be even more concerned and upset if that happens after the signature occurs. So being open about those kind of issues, making sure they have good clarity. I like to think of it as, it's not a point of arrival, it's a point of destination, a point of departure, not a point of destination. So, you're beginning a relationship with your customer at that point, so, you're embarking on something together. The other analogy I would use is, at Oracle, we used to talk about having fingerprints on the football. So essentially, your client is the one who's going to create the touchdown, right? So your client, any football fans in the room? Maybe a few. Your client is the one that's going to complete that touchdown pass and have that amazing story to tell about that last minute touchdown that wins the game. But you had your fingerprints on that football and kind of handed it to them. You were part of the process. So you really need to think about it as customer success, not individual success, and then that will create the right perspective for the sales process. Okay. So I've got a little bit of time to talk about some of the tools that will be helpful in the process. So, because I had such a limited amount of time to talk to you, and you will be able to download this presentation, so anybody who's scribbling frantically, you'll get a copy of the PowerPoint. So, I think that sales is kind of a lifetime obsession. Like, I think it's something that, you start to get into, and it's a continuing evolution of your skills. And, there are some great people who have written some great books. And so this is kind of my top 7. I'm sure, other people have their own favorites, but let's talk a little bit about what's here. So if you remember the first chart, and we had that kind of pie chart, it talked about, some of those softer skills about selling and about interpersonal skills. So, Dale Carnegie's book is awesome in supporting some of those kind of skills, right? So your ability to stand up and give that presentation, to be able to, kind of project your thoughts in a, clear and concise way. So that's really kind of a good place to start, and it's a great tool book for that. The other thing to note is that often, if you go searching on the web, you can actually find book summaries. So I think a lot of these actually have book summaries, so you don't necessarily have to invest the time to read the whole book. Keith's book about Never Eat Alone is great too. So the whole concept of networking and, kind of meeting people, and you don't know how useful the guy sitting beside you on the subway is going to be to you, and, being able to kind of harvest those contacts into your selling process. So that's a great read. The books here in the center are really around more the process and, getting the specifics of the sales process down and comfortable with. Taking the cold out of cold calling is, again, a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, but that kind of comfort with picking up the phone and some of the strategies that work well, talking very much about the timing and empathy with customers to be successful about it. And last but certainly not least, this whole concept of raving fans and, being someone who's very devoted to lifetime customers. I've done a lot of reading and thinking in this area. This is really about customer service, so not so much selling, but customer service. But where would selling be without customer service, right? So you really can't kind of get to done on that without having that kind of mindset. So Ken Blanchard talks about the concepts around customers who complain are actually investing in your relationship, and this idea of, I can certainly project that onto a sales cycle where they're giving you feedback and it's not positive, and that's an investment in that process. So if you can resolve their issues and move forward, they'll actually be a much more devoted customer, statistics say, than someone who hasn't taken the time to complain at all. So, of almost of all the books on the list, I'd encourage you to read the last one if you only have time for one. One of our other advisors, David Pasica, actually wrote a great blog on cold calling. So he has like kind of an analogy about the winter season and frosty receptions to your cold call being placed. But I'd encourage you to pull that up. If you Google Pasica and cold call, you'll get it. And you'll get these slides afterwards, so you'll have the link. And last but certainly not least, there's a lot of articles out on the MaRS Discovery District website that all deal with different little topic areas around selling. So, the specifics around booking a sales call and making sure you follow up, and some of the protocol and etiquette around that. And, if you're going to go out and actually conduct a sales call, and, what are the steps of that process? Getting prepared for that, and some of the specific tactics to deal with risks and problems, and the whole list of them. And they continue to add more and more articles on the website, so this list will continue to evolve. So I would encourage you to kind of check out what some of those articles are looking like. They're pretty quick read. They're kind of 1-page, 2-page documents. And that kind of brings us to the end of my topic matter, but I wanted to leave time for questions as well. So if you have a burning question that you've been dying to ask, now's the time. It's a quiet crowd today. Yes?
Name 3 companies that you've had contact with where they've exhibited a very high level of competency in terms of sales that you could offer everyone here. Canadian companies that... Preferably companies here in Toronto.
So Canadian companies that have a high degree of competency from a sales standpoint, is that the question? It's... I would almost segregate that into 2 areas. Like there's companies that have a strong growth record, like anywhere where you've got somebody that's really taking off and showing double-digit growth, then you've got some really successful salespeople behind that process. So generally, I would say that that's a great place to look. I think that Xerox has a great sales methodology. Xerox has been a great training organization for years and years and years, and I think they have invested a lot in a sales methodology that works really well. I think that some of the consulting companies really do a great job. So IBM and PricewaterhouseCoopers, that's more of a services sale, which is different than a product sale, but sometimes those skill sets, I certainly know people that have jumped that fence and are doing both. It also depends on what you're looking for. If it's more kind of early stage companies, then it tends to be more about personality, right? So the people that just have that ability to go out and talk to anybody and kind of make that relationship happen. But those are some successful companies. Yes?
You mentioned in the slide deck about price ahead of some of the key aspects.
So the question was, if we structure the deck so that we're talking about the secret sauce at the end, so we've kind of got the pricing before the secret sauce, then how can the customer understand the problem that you're solving? So I think you have to very clearly, at the beginning of the deck, tell them the problem that you're solving for them. So if you envision a situation where I have a significant business challenge, so maybe it's costing me $2 million and I have a freight delivery issue. And so if you come in and tell me that you can fix my freight delivery issue and you show competence and credibility around what that issue is and an understanding of it, and then you tell me that you're going to charge me $500,000 to fix that problem, you have my attention. So I think it's about getting that description of the problem that you're going to fix right up front, telling me that you're going to fix it. And then to some degree, I don't really care as much about all the details, right? Like it's more about the business problem that we're trying to resolve. That's a great question. Yes?
You mentioned the Xerox process, The Xerox process is kind of good. It's like you walk into a room and say, my God is better than your God. Where startups, quite often we get into a room, people don't even know there's a God.
Right.
So it's very different. So I find in startups, sometimes it's just very hard to sell the pain. People don't know there's a pain.
Right. Well, so I think this is really the challenge, and this is something that I certainly talk to my advisor clients about a lot, is this idea of creating the value proposition. So, if you're creating a product in your business, then you need to understand the issue that you're resolving, right? So why create this product? There needs to be a business need that you're addressing. And so, once you've kind of got that correlation, then it's about extrapolating that out to their business. So you are very right that it is not the same selling as a emerging company with no brand equity as it is selling as an Apple or an IBM or a real established company. It's very correct. So that's why this value proposition is so important, because people will have an assumption about value proposition with an established company. You need to educate them on what you're going to do to fix their problems. Yes, in the back.
One of the hard things is sometimes getting a meeting and actually booking the meeting to have that face-to-face and share the deck. Do you have any pointers of how to set up?
So the question was that sometimes getting a meeting is very challenging, and looking for pointers on how to set up the meeting. So there is an article on the MaRS website that kind of talks about booking a sales call, so I would encourage you to go check that out. But I really think it's about this concept of getting a message across that's intriguing. So and it requires some thinking, right? So you need to in a creative way kind of talk to the person about the value that you're going to bring. So if it's a retailer, and with the financial situation that we're dealing with in the market, and margins are very slim in grocery as an example, if your product can increase margin on a basket level for the retailer, then saying that, and that should be on their top 10 lists of things that is keeping them awake at night, and allow them to want to meet with you. I think it's also important to figure out who to meet with in the organization. We all want to meet with the CEO. You want to kind of get to the top of the tree and get to the decision maker. So his time is very limited, right? So maybe it's better to start at a lower level of the organization where their schedule will be a little more free, and then kind of work your way up to the guy who's kind of got the sold stamp, right? Yes?
Have you found, from a sales standpoint, any differences between the US and Canada in terms of your time to Europe?
So my experience has been largely North American. So when I was running the trade show company, 95% of my customers were down in the States. And my experience was that it's kind of like, it's like Canada on steroids, right? So like, if a Canadian executive has, 15 minutes for you, then the guy down in the States has 5. And, if we're like, focused on a particular issue, they're even more focused. So I just found it like almost a more intense market to kind of do business in. I think that generally, the same kind of rules of business apply. The government adds a different element. So we have, different societal kind of impacts in Canada than they have down in the States, depending on the industry you're selling into. So healthcare, perhaps is a great example of that. So, in industry, there'll be differences driven by some of those government interactions. In the clean tech space, that's very true as well, because all of the governments are kind of at different spaces with that. But other than those kind of government differences, then it was more of an intensity difference. Europe, I think, you would obviously have those same kind of government kind of effects in the different geographies that you're going into, but I don't have any personal experience there. Any other questions?
In one of your previous answers, you mentioned about starting at the top, which you the decision maker as a starting point. Is that always the best case scenario? Like, is that the right way, or do you start at a more working level?
So the question is it better to kind of start at the top of the organization or start at a more working level and build the relationship and kind of work your way up? I think it depends. Depends on your product and the impact you're going to have. The caution I would have is that the value proposition can be different at different levels of the organization. So we might think about if we go back to the retail example, you might think about sales per square foot increasing, or metrics around basket size or margin. And those are all, very clearly issues for the president. So he would have responsibility for all of those areas. But, the guy managing deliveries from the warehouse, if he's kind of the guy that you're building up your relationship with, he may have a part of this issue and your product may be very relevant to him, but he may not care about margin or basket size. So you have to ensure that you're tailoring your value proposition to each level of the organization and making it relevant to their day job. So I don't think there's really a right answer. Often it's really just about getting in with whoever will kind of take your call. One of the methodologies that exists is around spin selling, and spin selling advocates that you get a fox in an organization. So essentially building a relationship at one of those working levels. Sometimes it's not the decision maker, and very frequently not. And this guy becomes your coach, this guy or girl, and helps you to kind of navigate the organization and understand who you should kind of book your next meeting with. So I think that, if you have the opportunity to be able to pitch at the top of the company, then that's a great place to start and, a great opportunity. But if you need to kind of work your way up, then you can make that work as well. So I don't really have a yes or no answer for you. I'm sorry. Yes, Carrie?
Qualify leads, like how do you find out if the person you're talking to has responsibility for the budget, makes decisions? Like do you ask them that, or how do you?
So the question was, how do you qualify leads, and how do you find out if the person you're talking to has responsibility for the budget and other details? There's really a lot of research required in the sales process. So, being able to be very knowledgeable about the company and about the specifics of who's responsible for what. I have certainly been in situations where I've asked them, if they have budget, if they have signing authority. You need to kind of get to a place where you have quite a strong relationship to be able to do that. It's not kind of a first meeting kind of question. That would pretty much guarantee that you don't get a second meeting. But I think that as much as you can do research on the company and the organization, there's a lot of information available in annual reports and things like that that will help to guide a lot of those questions and make sure that you're kind of working with the right person who's asking them the right question. Yes?
Can you recommend some ways to help figure out what someone's budget is?
So I didn't hear the last part of the question.
I'm just wondering if there's a way you can recommend a way to figure out what someone's budget is.
Find out.
Once you figured out that they have signing authority, how do you determine how much budget they have?
Okay. So the question is, once you've kind of determined that you're speaking to the right person about budget, then how can you determine what their budget is? That's a really tough question. I think that, there's ways to kind of interpret, looking at annual reports and looking at industry averages. So one of the things that MaRS offers is some industry research and market research. So sometimes there can be, if you're looking at a retailer, and typically the market says that retailers spend 10% on research and development, then you can pretty much impute that the CIO has a 10% of sales budget relative to IT. So there's some things like that you can do. Hospitals will have, dictated kind of levels around spending for marketing and different areas of the company. If it's getting more finite, then it's really a conversation you need to have kind of directly with them, or if you're lucky enough to kind of find a coach or a fox in the organization who can help you to find some of that information. But some of those are like the trickiest bits of the process. I think that if you focus on the problem and the cost of that problem, and then tier your pricing to resolving that problem. So they have a $2 million issue and you're, a 2-year payback on that $2 million issue, then budget becomes less of an issue because it's probably about capital investment or something that kind of takes it off the P&L. Yeah?
I was wondering if you could talk about the effectiveness of the sales process, mainly for startups, for hiring salespeople versus commission-based.
So I think the question is structuring compensation for salespeople, commissioned or non-commissioned. So the short answer there is that behavior follows compensation. So I've certainly had salespeople in my career that were not compensated on a commission basis, and they acted that way. So if you want someone to be focused on finding the next deal for you, and you want them to be passionately committed to that, then I think commission is very much the way to go. I also think it needs to be individual commission, so not group sales. That's something else sometimes, especially in an emerging market. It's kind of, you want the team to kind of feel like they're working together, and if Joe gets a deal or Tim gets a deal, it doesn't really matter. We're all kind of growing the company together. So that's like a very heartwarming sentiment, but it doesn't really drive the kind of behavior that if you want quick growth, and most emerging startup companies do, then you really need that guy to be focused on selling his child for the next deal, right? So that would be my advice. And then it becomes a percentage of the deal, so you need to kind of build the pricing for that into your pricing structure, so knowing that you have the cost of the product and then X% of that sale is going to go in commission to the salesperson. Yeah.
Madam, I want to ask a question. I am a tractor dealer, farm machinery in India. One dealer was Massey Ferguson, and we were selling Ford and Escort tractors. He was getting 6 tractors a month, and he was on booking for 2 years, for 3 years. And we got about 40 tractors a month, and we have to sell in the same area. Then my company gave a advice. He is selling 6 tractors sitting on the chair with the booking. We have to sell 40 tractors a month. Then we were given sales, service, spare parts, everything. Then our marketing manager gave one thing. we lose customers, 69% of the customers we lose due to indifferent behavior of our own staff, because we are sitting in the cabin. No direct approach with the customer. The salesman will say, you don't go there, manager, bank timing will be there, loan will not be processed. Then direct contact of the management, of the owner or the manager with the customers, going to villages every week or in a month. Customers contact was the first. You have to put in the shoes of the customer to get the sales. In the very first year, we got 400 deliveries in a single year.
Wow.
In India.
That's
This
awesome.
was the example. When you are sitting on the chair, the salesman or your clerk or the assistant will say, you don't go to his cabin. We will deal the case. Customers contact with the owner, with the high management should be there to increase the sales in stiff competition. Messi still selling 70 tractors a year. We sold 400 in that year.
Yeah. So I think the comment is around the fact that executive involvement in the sales process can have a really positive impact. I totally agree with that.
And we should have 3 M's: manpower, material, and money. These are the 3 things to develop a business.
Yeah. The example that I've always used is that salespeople should consider their executive team part of their toolkit. So sometimes, and we were talking about how to get meetings at different levels of the company, sometimes kind of pulling out your president and offering a meeting is a way to get a meeting with their president, right? So as a team of salespeople, it's an item in your toolkit to be able to offer that up as a strategy to get a senior meeting. You know, it's best if you have a president who can support those kind of meetings. So not everyone is customer facing. So we have to be able to support that properly. But usually there's like a CIO or a COO or a CEO that can support those kind of meetings. That's a great comment.
Just want to thank Debbie Baxter for a very great